Hello and welcome to this month's painting tutorial. This month provides us with a unique situation. I have a client who has this old-time photo of her mother. It's a blasé photo, but it's sentimental value to her and she would like me to colorize it. So I'm going to show you how I would go about adding color to a black and white. So let's get started. The first thing I see is, boom, this picture is cut in half. The horizon line is right in the center of the page. That's no good. So, do I want to move it up or do I want to move it down? Get a clean piece of paper and crop it one way and then crop it the other. You know, I almost like less sky and more dirt. So let's sketch that horizon line first. We said upper third, so there it is. Then I have this house. First of all, mark off the edges of the house. How high do I want it to be? How wide do I want it to be? And then get this car figured into the picture as well. And this figure will go about here. So now let me straighten up some of these lines. Now I've cleaned up those lines and I'm ready to move on to the next stage, but that's not painting because I have some bright whites and some small highlights, and so I need to protect those with some masking fluid. Now the easiest way to do that is to use a super nib. It's a needle tool filled with masking fluid. Now when it comes to deciding what you want to use masking fluid on, it's these small detaily little things like lines on the car, highlights on the hubcaps, and the handles of these tools. Those are the sort of things that I'm going to take my time just to protect a highlight edge here and there. Now I'm going to let the masking fluid dry and then I'm going to be ready to paint. So I'll come back to you in a few minutes. Now that masking fluid is dry. And I also have my grayscale and value finder, which is going to be really important when you're transferring a black and white picture to a color picture and you want to stay consistent with your values. So what you want to do here is you just put the card down around the area that you're trying to find the value for, and you basically match it up where it looks closest. So the sky is really light. Pure white is a value 10. The sky is probably a 9. So what I want to do, I want to stay fairly consistent, but I don't want my painting to be boring. I want the woman to look strong, and I think that the elements of the starkness and the plainness and the vast heaps of dirt that she's trying to make something out of really help to present that story, even as it is, without the color there at all. But the color is going to dictate the mood. So you just have to decide, what do you want to say? So I'm going to start by water masking around the house and the chimney. That's just using clean water to flood an area and to keep the paint out of certain areas as well. Now, I have my value finder and I have scraps of watercolor paper, and what I'm going to do is test my color and see what value it would be before I paint it on my sheet. So let me get a cerulean blue, water it down, maybe mix in just a touch of red, and that's going to be a lot closer to what I'm looking for. So I'll flood that in. But remember, you don't want just one ugly old color in your sky. That's boring. Always have at least 2 colors, if not 3 colors, mixing on your page. So I'll have this cerulean blue. Then I'm going to mix in with an ultramarine blue and stripe that in. Now that looks pretty good. I'm just going over with clean water to let those colors blend together. And then I'm going to go down and work on the dirt. The dirt is the other large shape on this picture. So I'm going to speed things up a little bit by spraying with a water bottle right on the paper and then just spreading that around with my brush. Then, to get that nice, interesting, irregular texture, I'm going to get some pieces of paper and I'm going to mask the sky. Okay, so now I'm going to get my brush wet. I'm going to mix up some browns and reds, and I'm just going to sprinkle those colors in, just like this. Just get a lot of color on the page. Reds, some yellows, and then I'm going to spritz that paper to re-wet some of those areas before they can dry, and then move them around a little bit. Either you can tilt the paper or you can use a brush on the side And I'm also going to do some different texture makers, like get a piece of paper towel and sponge on some textures as well. So just wad it up so it has some nice interesting creases in it like this. Dip that in some paint, and then you can sponge over the top. You don't want to lift up everything that you did though, so be careful. Make sure that you leave some whites, then you can let that dry. Okay, we've got a nice interesting beginning here, but I'm going to show you a different technique too for making some sand texture. Just take some actual sand, sprinkle it over the area, and I'm going to focus my efforts on the foreground because that's where you'd expect to see the most detail. And then I'm going to use a cup and mix up some sand color. Okay, I'm going to wet my sand, and then I'm just going to kind of keep my cup right over the surface here and drop some color on the page. Maybe I'll just do a little bit of spritzing in places where it might have gotten a little bit blobby. Okay, I've never done this texture on hot press paper before, so you and I will have to wait and see together what happens. I bet that it's going to be something that I couldn't have done with a brush in any case. So, now, we wait. Okay, this is all dry now, so I'm going to take this dirt off, and we'll see what we got. Looks like a big blob, so let's see what we can do with this. I'm just going to spritz and then use some clean water on a straight brush here and rub out some of these rough edges. Blot with a tissue. Rub and blot, soften up these messy edges. And then as I do that, I'm also going to brush in some different lighter colors here too. See, I'm just going to spritz, let these new colors combine with what's on the page already. So if you have some dead flat areas, just mix up some vibrant hues, reds, oranges, yellows, and see what you can't do by just adding the new with the old here. That looks pretty good, so let's let that dry again. The ground is dry again, so I'm going to do some detail work in the rest of the picture. Now, I don't have any idea what the original house color was, but going back to my value chart, I see that I need to keep it fairly light, maybe a value 5 or even lighter. So I'm thinking, let's see, kind of like this house to be yellow. So I'll get some yellow ochre on my brush, do a test strip to check the value. It's good about there. Get a puddle that's big enough to cover everything. And then I'm going to start on the side of the house that doesn't have bright highlights. Put everything down in one big coat. I'll go around the hat here carefully too. Then this side of the house is really, really bright. So I'm going to add a lot of water to that other color and add a little bit of something, but it's just a really light tone. And then I'll just quickly here brush in something really fairly blasé for the roof. I'm just putting it down in one big piece and then I'm going to let that dry. So I'll use the time then to go and do a little bit more detail work in the dirt here. I'm going to pick up a little bit of a line to start developing the idea that there are some furrows. So I just lift out with a wet brush and then I blot it dry. And then too, I'm going to use a smaller brush and do that same sort of work to just lighten up a couple of stones in the foreground. So you see how I'm just rubbing with a wet clean brush and then I blot the area right away and I pick up these large textures. I'm going to do that kind of work all over the page and just pull out some highlights for the stones, some dirt clumps, and then I'll come back and we'll push on with the dry house. Now that the house is dry, I'm going to go in with a flat and do a little bit more detail. So there are a few planks of wood here and there that are just a little bit darker. So I'm going to lay those down and kind of use a broken edge here, not being too precise, to give some indication of something else going on. Then I'm going to mix up a purple for a shadow and carefully lay that down. I want to do it in one stroke, like that. There's one stroke for that shadow, one stroke there, and I'm going to turn the paper so that I can do this last one in one nice smooth gesture. And I have a nice dark lip on the roof edge right here. I'll go back in with that darker brown for the roof itself, and I'll outline the top eaves here. You'll notice that those are areas of really high contrast. Make sure that those are just exactly right, because the eye is going to go straight there. And then I'm going to use a round brush and add some detail to that car. This isn't as dark as it's going to be at the end, but it will give me a better idea of where the masking fluid is right now and where I need to make adjustments to the shape. And I'm also, with that same color, I'm going to add a little bit of detail to these windows. So just at the top, I think I'm going to indicate that these are little pink friendly curtains here. So it's not like a ghost house. That'll just be the base tone, then I can add some shadows over the top. Very good. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of work on her. So, get rid of the masking fluid on the skirt. Then I have to decide what color clothes she's wearing. I think I want her in something fairly nondescript, so probably some neutrals, browns, and so on. I'm going to give her a yellow ochre brownish cap. Oh, but that blends right into the house, doesn't it? So that's no good. Let's go a little bit more red. That's better. Then I'll have her wearing a kind of reddish coat. So the first shape here is the lightest color because it's going to be the color of the highlights. After this base coat dries, then I can go in with my darker tones for the shadows. And then for the skirt, I'm just going to keep that really light. And for now, I'll just focus on a little bit of shading here at the front of it. Down here are her boots, and it's going to be tricky not to let those get completely lost in the dirt. So I'm going to try to keep them a different value. And then the only other thing left is her skin tone. So I'll just add a little bit here and there. When this dries, I can add details on top. So let's let these base coats dry and then come back in with our shadow details. Okay, now this is all dry, so we can go in with some more detail in the car in places. I'm going to do that step that I talked about before, where you place the darker shadow shapes. So now I'm using just straight Payne's Gray and a small brush that can get into these small areas. And I'm just going to use my reference material and develop this car a little bit better. So you can see how I'm just using this, and I'm developing the outlines first, and then I fill in more quickly. Then I'm going to use a larger brush, and I'm going to mix up a purpley shadow color, because this car is casting a deep dark shadow on the ground. And the dark color will just fill that all in. Then here I'll put some tone over the top of the wheel, and on the top of the wheel over here. So I'll leave that there for now, and add a little bit more detail to these darks in the window. So this is a different dark version of the color that the rest of the window is painted in. And after that dries, I'll go back in and I will tone down the window panes because they're too bright. Now let's add some detail to our woman. I'm going to use that same shadow color on the dirt that I used under the car, and I'm going to develop the shadow that she's casting on the soil. This back foot is in deep shadow compared to the front, so then I will just fill all this in as one smooth shape. Add some shadows to the shadow shape of her coat. That's looking good. Just put a little bit of brown in her hair. And then I'm going to add another layer of detail to the dirt. So I pulled out some highlights last time. Now I'm going to darken up one side of those. A quick way of doing that is to use your brush and just kind of use it the wrong way. Push with it, and those bristles will come up and make some interesting textures for you. So it's a lot faster and it looks less deliberate than when they're actually painted. Really quickly here, I can add the handle, and I'm going to put in the, let me turn this around actually. I'll add the dark underside of this handle. Nice. Then there is a pot, and I will just highlight one side of it by blotting that with a paper towel. And then off camera, I'm just going to finish up a little bit more detail in the dirt. But with just a few more details, this will be a finished painting. So let me finish that up and come back to you one last time. Okay, here's our finished painting. Here's the top and the bottom. And here is the photograph that we started with. Your eye moves all the way around the composition, so I'm pleased with the way this turned out. I'm going to upload the file of the photo so that you can take your hand at painting it as well. And I think it would also be a good idea for you to use those same principles and translate a different black and white photo of your choosing into a color painting. So that concludes this month's painting tutorial. I hope that you've learned some things you can take back with you to your own studio. And as usual, thank you so much for watching.